There is a book that I read a long time ago called Pilgrim's Progress. And this is John Bunyan's classic work. And it tells the story of a man, Christian, who wants to reach the celestial city, which is a beautiful and perfect city where God dwells in the story. He learns about it, and he also learns that his own city, the city of destruction, is bound to fall. So he sets off on his journey for the celestial city, carrying a burden on his back, which represents sin, and he sets off towards the celestial city. But it is not an easy journey. There are many discouraging people on the way trying to get him off course. He just pretty much immediately upon leaving, he falls into this muddy pit representing despair and doubt. And then after escaping it, he meets a man who tries to convince him to leave this difficult path and to do something more sensible. All along the way, there are spiritual dangers. The hill of difficulty he must endure, and there's hardship, and he's exhausted. There's the valley of humiliation, where he meets Apollyon, a representation of Satan. And in a battle with Apollyon, he suffers wounds, but ultimately defeats him. And then he travels through the valley of the shadow of death, which is this terrifying, shadowy place full of fear and dangers that you can't see. There are false teachers and worldly temptations and bad companions who try to lead him astray. Towards the end, he's even captured by a giant named Despair, and there he is tormented. All along the way, what keeps Christian going? Well, if you've read the book or if you've heard the story, you know that he meets helpers along the way who remind him to keep going. And there's friends who travel with him, encouraging him. But more than anything else, one thing keeps Christian going: his focus on the celestial city. The celestial city in this book, it's the ultimate the destination of Christian's pilgrimage. It's heaven. It's the heavenly home which he's been traveling to towards the beginning. It is an extraordinary place of beauty, of glory, peace, and joy. In fact, as you can see in the background in the picture behind me with this book, you see that as Christian approaches it, he sees the city situated on a great mountain, and it's shining with the glory of God. Its gates are described as pearls. Streets are like gold, so brilliant and pure that they resemble transparent glass. The city is surrounded by heavenly glory, and the inhabitants are dressed in white, signifying purity and righteousness. In fact, it's so glorious, there's no need for ordinary sunlight. And as they approach, they hear the joyful singing of the inhabitants and countless people who have already completed their pilgrimages. Angels welcome in travelers, and citizens of the city rejoice when people arrive. Most important thing about the celestial city is not the gold or the pearls, but it's that God dwells there. The King dwells with his people. And when Christian reaches it, he's received into the city with great joy. Pilgrim's Progress, it's a great example for us with lots of lessons in life. For one, life is a pilgrimage or a journey. That's one of the lessons that we see on the screen behind me. This life is a pilgrimage, it's a journey. And on this pilgrimage or journey, we all get weary. As we face challenges in life, all of us get weary. But just like Christian, Pilgrim's Progress had encouragement from God, God gives us encouragement to keep moving forward. And just like Christian, one way God gives encouragement is to remind us of our destination, which is heaven. Family, that's what Zechariah 12 through 14 are all about. These final chapters of this book, as we're finishing up our series in the Minor Prophets, it's a picture of the destination. And so there's one main point that I want us all to appreciate that God has for us in these chapters. Here's the point. To find strength for the journey, you need to meditate on that day. If you heard Anne reading, there was one phrase that she kept repeating over and over and over and over again. She wasn't stuttering, she was reading the text. And it said, on that day. on that day. For Zechariah, that day is the day of the Lord. It's the day when God brings final judgment for the wicked and final and ultimate peace for his people. That day was something that the returned exiles were looking forward to, and we today, sitting here, we get to look forward to that as well. It's the day when Jesus returns to make all things new. If you've been with us for a couple of weeks, you know that the book of Zechariah, in this book, there are returned exiles. And for them, life was hard. They were struggling, and there were plenty of distractions and discouragements. For the returned exiles, life was hard. So God encourages them in Zechariah. After Zechariah has corrected them in the first 11 chapters, so now he ends his prophecy by giving them tremendous encouragement as he describes the day of the Lord on that day. And God's intention for the exiles and for us today is that we would draw strength from this reminder, that we would take time to slow down and meditate on how glorious this day will be. Let me ask you a question. When is the last time you meditated on heaven? When's the last time you really thought about what it will be like when Jesus returns and ushers in the new heavens and the new earth? Now, don't get me wrong, we aren't supposed to skip over this life. We're called now to this pilgrimage, to devote ourselves to one another, to our callings in life, and to walking with God and loving others. This life is important. But just like for a Christian in Pilgrim's Progress, this life is hard, and there are so many challenges, so many hardships. We get hurt. We get wounded mentally, emotionally, physically. We get weary. Like Christian, if we're going to keep moving forward, we need to keep the end in mind. You know, one of the most traditional and classic passages describing heaven comes from Revelation 21. I want to read this really briefly to kind of whet your appetite, and then we're going to get into descriptions of heaven from Zechariah. Revelation 21, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out from heaven, from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. It's a picture of beauty and joy. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among people, and he will dwell with them. Family, in the new heavens and the earth, you will never wonder, God, where are you? You're never going to wonder, God, why are you letting this happen to me? You will be dwelling with God in a way far beyond anything you could possibly fathom. They will be his people, and God will be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne is saying, I am making everything new. This is Revelation 21, one picture of heaven. Now, I want to say this. Zechariah 12 through 14 is non-traditional. It occurs in a very specific context, in a context of former captivity of Israel when the exiles had returned, but they're returning to discouragement. They're returning to distraction. They're returning to sin and depression. And so in this context, the Lord calls his people to look ahead to that day. Now, in this sermon, there's going to be 4 main points you see on the screen behind me. 1, on that day, God will protect us. On that day, God will purify us. On that day, God will fight for us. And on that day, God will lead us. Let's take a moment now to focus on God will protect us on that day. Now, before we change slides, let me say a word about this section where God promises protection of his people. There are 3 images that Zechariah gives us for what that day will look like. And these are surprising images to describe a peaceful day of the Lord. Because the images actually sound kind of violent. You'll see what I mean in just a minute. But here's why. Remember the context. Israel has been, was being, and will continue to be oppressed by wicked enemies, which is one of the themes of the minor prophets. Right? God speaks to oppression. He cares about justice. Right? So, in order to bring peace on that day, God first has to throw down the wicked enemies who are oppressing his people. The peace doesn't come until the wicked are thrown down. So let's look at the first image. It's an image of a cup of judgment. Zechariah 12:1, a pronouncement, the word of the Lord coming to Israel, concerning Israel. A declaration of the Lord who stretched out the heavens, laid the foundation of the earth, and formed a spirit of a man within us. Look, I will make Jerusalem a cup that causes staggering for the people who surround the city. The siege against Jerusalem will also involve Judah. Now, in Bible times, the image of a cup has significance that we don't appreciate. For us, a cup is something that you hold water, you hold liquid, you hold a drink in. But in Bible times, the cup was symbolic, oftentimes, of judgment. Think about this. Do you remember Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane before he was getting ready to go up to the cross? He prayed to God, the Father, and Jesus on that day said, God, let this cup pass from me. You see, he's talking about the cup of judgment of God's wrath that's getting ready to be poured out on Jesus on the cross. The cup is an image of judgment. It's also an image of drunkenness. In this context, what Zechariah is saying, God through Zechariah is saying, that the enemies who are coming to attack Israel on that day, the cup of judgment and drunkenness will be poured out on them. So these enemy warriors will be staggering around helpless, unable to do any harm to God's people. That's one image. There's a second image of a heavy stone. Zechariah chapter 12, verse 3. On that day, I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples, and all who try to lift it will injure themselves severely when the nations of the earth gather against her. You ever thrown out your back picking up something heavy? I have. It's not pretty. Right? And this image is an image of pain for the enemies who are coming to do harm, the enemies who are coming to do wickedness, to do violence against God's people. He's saying, I'm going to make them throw their back out. They will not be able to harm my people. Why? Because God will protect them. God will protect us. There's a third image, an image of a flaming torch. Verse 6, on that day I will make the leaders of Judah like a fire pot in a wood pile, like a flaming torch among sheaves. They will consume all the peoples around them on the right and the left, while Jerusalem continues to be inhabited on its site in Jerusalem. You think about this image. You got a torch in the midst of a field full of dry sheaves. And that torch just lights the fire, and the fire consumes the whole field. And family, the point here isn't so much the destruction of the enemies, although that is included. The main point is that God is protecting his people to give them peace. I heard recently a Bible professor at a college say that he's noticed that the types of questions his students ask has changed over the years. Used to, one of the most common questions about God that people would ask is, why do bad things happen to good people? That was a common question. But the question has changed over the years as oppression, wickedness, corruption has kind of continued in this world and grown. It's more people are more aware of it than ever. And the question now people are asking is, what about the wicked people? Will justice come for the wicked people? God tells us here, on that day, justice will be served. All of the wicked oppressors who in this life seem like they get away with it. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that, things work out well for everyone in this world. I'm not going to tell you that life is fair. I'm not going to tell you that people get what they deserve in this world. What I will tell you, because God promises it, is that God's justice will be served. No one escapes God's justice. He sees the pain of oppression. He sees the pain of broken systems, those who are lost, forgotten, dehumanized. And he will one day make all things new. And so here's the point. The main takeaway from this section is that we will have peace. On the day of the Lord, when Jesus returns, we will have peace. Look at verse 8. On that day, the Lord will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that on that day, the one who is weakest among them will be like David. In this context, he's referring to King David, the mightiest king of Israel, the king of strength, the king whose heart loved the Lord. And on that day, even the weakest will become like the strongest king of Israel. On that day, we will have peace. And all of this is happening, by the way, through the Lord of armies. Through the Lord of armies, their God. It's not happening because they are so strong. It's not happening because they figure stuff out. It's not happening because of military might. God says elsewhere, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. Family, I want to encourage you to reflect for a moment on the absence of peace in your life. In this world, in this nation, in your home. Or maybe there's an absence of peace that you feel internally. Minds racing, hearts fluttering, stomachs in knots. Jesus himself promises us that he is the Prince of Peace. And one day he will bring peace, a perfect peace, to this world and to your life. God will make all things new. We aren't there yet, but we're going. And by the way, while we're on this journey, God gives us the Holy Spirit to speak words of peace to us, to help us draw near to God in the absence of peace in this world. Family, on that day, we will have peace. Remember the goal, the main point is to find strength for the journey. We need to meditate on that day. And we've seen the first point already. If we get to the next slide, we've seen the first point. God will protect us and we will have peace. But also, we see through this book that God will purify us. We will be made new. To find strength for the journey of your life and mine, we need to meditate on that day. On that day, God will purify us. And that includes, family, that includes a sorrow over sin. Now you might find that as kind of a weird concept when we're talking about the day of the Lord. But here's the thing. Sorrow for sin is the first step in new life. Sorrow for sin is the first step in repentance, in growth, in transformation. Sorrow for sin is the first step in actually becoming the new person that you want to be. So it's not surprising at all that on this day, God talks about sorrow for sin in verse 10 of chapter 12. Then I will pour out my spirit of grace and prayer on the house of David and the residents of Jerusalem, and they will look at me whom they pierced. They will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child. They will weep bitterly for him as one weeps for a firstborn. Family, sorrow over sin, true godly sorrow over sin, it's not a worthless sorrow. It's not an empty pain. It's a pain that brings life, that brings closeness with God. It's a sorrow that is willing to confess, to acknowledge, to not minimize or hide what we've done. But it's a sorrow that openly confesses to the Lord, this is who I am, this is what I've done, and my only hope is that you would forgive me, God. That is a sorrow that actually leads to peace. Because on the other side of sorrow for sin is the freedom and forgiveness that we are assured of because of our gracious God. God will purify us on that day. That includes sorrow for sin, but it also includes removing temptations. Chapter 13:1. On that day, a fountain will be opened for the house of David and for the residents of Jerusalem to wash away all sin and all impurity. On that day, I will remove the names of the idols from the land. So the idols were in the land tempting the people, constantly tempting the people. They will no longer be remembered. I will banish the prophets and the unclean spirit from the land. The prophets were a constant temptation to the people. God says, on that day, I'm going to remove anything that would tempt you into sin, that would tempt you to run from me. Family, here's the main takeaway. On this day, we will be made new. We will be made new. Family, are you ever frustrated with yourself? This is honest time right now, right? We're not a church who kind of values people coming in pretending to be something that we're not. We're a church that values honesty because we're confident of the grace of the Lord. So my question to you is, do you ever get frustrated with yourself? Do you ever get distracted? Do you find yourselves continuing tempted, maybe in the same direction? Are you frustrated by the mistakes of your life? Are you frustrated because what you've suffered in this life and the way that trauma stays with you? Are you frustrated by the mental or emotional state that it just isn't right? Are you frustrated that you're not walking with the Lord the way that you want to? Family, On that day, all of those frustrations will be gone. And all of our sin and all of our shame and all of our mistakes will be fully in the past. And we get to dwell with God in paradise as people who are made perfect, who are at that point not struggling with sin anymore, not struggling with addictive tendencies anymore, not struggling with the weight of the suffering of this life. We are made new on that day. We need to meditate on that day. God will protect us. He will purify us, but he will also fight for us, and we will be strengthened. Now, this point is a little bit different. This point is kind of like a return to reality. You know how you go on a vacation, maybe you have a great vacation, and then coming back is kind of hard, isn't it? Because you're back to reality, back to job, or back to work, or back to your relationships, back to the chores, back to the bills, right? Back to reality is hard, right? Well, that's what this passage, this point is all about, the back to reality function of what's happening. Because after God through Zechariah has told them about what will happen on that day, and how on that day everything will be good because God will protect his people, and on that day everything will be good because God will purify us. But then he talks about the realities. We're not there yet. You see, the warfare continues against God's people. In the book of Zechariah, the people, the exiles, they're not done with warfare yet, sadly. And y'all, they've been through a lot. They've been through war. They've been through getting captured. They've been through exile. They've been through a lot. But God loves them enough to be honest with them, to say, hey, the suffering isn't over yet. He says in Zechariah 14:1, look, a day belonging to the Lord is coming when the plunder taken from you will be divided in your presence. And then Zechariah continues to talk about that day with using some really graphic language that I actually chose to edit because of the different ages in this room. It's not a good day. God is promising the people still bad things are coming. It's not going to get better yet. It's going to get worse first. Family, one of the realities in our life is that as much as you and I long for heaven, we long for the day that Jesus returns, God also promises, Jesus promises disciples and promises us today that in this world you will have trouble. Peter says in his letters, don't be surprised when the fiery trial comes against you as if something strange is happening to you. You see, God loves us enough to set clear expectations. I was talking to someone this week and he used the phrase, clarity is kindness. Sometimes being clear and setting expectations, that's an act of kindness. Clarity is kindness. God is kind to us by giving us clear expectations in this world. While one day heaven awaits us, in this world, on this pilgrimage, on this journey, there is painful things happening for us. There will be suffering, there will be trials. But the Lord fights to defend his people. Look at verse 3. After describing in 2 verses how bad things will be for the people on that day, the Lord promises that hope is not lost, because even on that day when suffering and oppression gets worse, I will go out and I will fight against those nations as he fights on a day of battle. And then look at the descriptions here. God is conveyed truly as a cosmic being. You know, you get all of the soldiers fighting in the war with their swords and their shields and their horses and their spears. And there's all of these human soldiers fighting. And then in the midst of that, verse 4, on that day, God's feet, now this is a metaphor, but it's a metaphor conveying the cosmic power of God and how overwhelming his presence is in the context of these human soldiers fighting. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. Then the Mount of Olives will split in half from east to west, forming a huge valley, so that half the mountain will move to the north and half to the south. And you imagine, again, this is an image, this is a picture of what it will be like. You imagine the surprise and the awe of these human soldiers fighting the battle, swinging their swords, defending from blows. And in the midst of all of the battle tumult, you see the mountains being split as God arrives on the scene, pictured as this cosmic giant. coming to stop the war and defend his people. God will fight for us. He promises, because clarity is kindness, he promises that there is still suffering to come. But he also promises that in the midst of the battle, he will fight for us. He will strengthen us. It's really interesting because the end of chapter 13 describes the way that God wins the battle. It's not what you would think. Chapter 14, verse 7. The Lord defends his people by sacrificing the shepherd. Sword, awake against my shepherd, against the man who is my associate. This is the declaration against the Lord of armies. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. Jesus quotes this Old Testament reference from Zechariah to refer to himself when he is struck down and the disciples are scattered. This is a picture of the good shepherd. And so what God does as the enemies are coming against God's people is God takes up the sword, but instead of striking the enemies, he actually strikes himself. He strikes the good shepherd. Family, this is a picture of the gospel of Jesus Christ. How does God come against our worst and most dangerous enemy? Sin and Satan. He does it by striking himself. When he sends Jesus to the cross, he deals a death blow to Satan and to sin and to death by taking the sword out and striking Jesus on the cross. And you see the outcome. As powerful and as surprising and as counterintuitive as that is, what happens when God strikes the shepherd? He says, I will refine them as silver is refined, and I will test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name, and I will answer them. And I will say, you are my people, and they will say, the Lord is our God. Family, because Jesus was struck on the cross as the good shepherd, the sword of God's wrath coming against him, because of that, we are made new. We're forgiven. And the cross is no longer for us. The wrath of God is no longer for us because it was all poured out on Jesus. Family, the main takeaway from this section, we will be strengthened. While we're fighting the good fight, while we're walking with God, we will be strengthened by God's Spirit. There's a great scene in the movie Gladiator. There's many great scenes in the movie Gladiator, but Maximus and his best friend, they're fighting together, they're struggling. They've got so many challenges to overcome. Most times things look hopeless. And both Maximus and his friend, they encourage one another constantly throughout the movie by talking about what it'll be like, and they're sharing their own kind of concepts of what heaven will be like. Because they know that one day, probably not too soon, they're gonna die. And they talk about how beautiful heaven will be and how they'll be able to be reunited by their loved ones. And it's, not coming in a Christian context from a pagan concept, but they're explaining how glorious it will be to encourage them. But then they say this thing over and over again. They say, one day we'll get to see my wife, we'll get to see my child, but not yet. And that phrase, not yet, signals to them that they keep fighting, that they don't give up, because that day is not yet here. And in a sense, this is what God is telling us today. One day, peace will come. One day, all struggles are gone. One day, we will be fully made new, but not yet. Today, God tells us, my child, as you keep fighting, my Spirit's with you. As you keep walking, my Spirit is with you, and I will strengthen you as you're on the journey. To find strength on the journey, we need to meditate on that day. And the final passage, God will lead us, and therefore we will have rest. In Zechariah 14:9, we see this. On that day, the Lord will become king over the whole earth. The Lord alone and his name alone. All the land from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem, will be changed into a plain, but Jerusalem will be raised up and will remain in its sight. People will live there, and there will never again be curse of complete destruction. Family, let me be clear. The Lord reigns today on his throne. And yet in his wisdom and in his providence, he allows things to happen that are against his will right now. He allows things to happen that are wicked. He allows things to happen in his wisdom that still aren't right. But one day he will step into the throne in a new way, and all wickedness will be cast out. All sin will be put away. And on that day, he will reign as the good king, as the faithful leader. And we, his followers, get to have rest, knowing that a good king is on the throne. A good king will reign. And as king, the Lord will guard against any enemies. He will promise unlasting protection, or everlasting protection. He promises that nothing will change. In this life, when things are going well, do you ever wonder, like, oh, this makes me a little uncomfortable, you know? Because in this life, things break down. We go through good seasons, we go through bad seasons. And there have been times when I've been in a good season, and I'm both rejoicing and I'm a little bit nervous. But what's around the corner? In heaven, that will never be the case again. Because our good king reigns, and he is promising that what happens tomorrow will be even better than what happens today. There will be a lasting peace. And all the nations will come and worship. Zechariah 14:16. Then all the survivors from all the nations that come against Jerusalem will go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of armies, and to celebrate the festival of shelters. Family, in this world, we still struggle with segregation. We still struggle with kind of being comfortable with people who look like us and sound like us. And so we recognize that while we celebrate diversity within this local church context, sadly, this is more unique than it should be in this world. But in heaven, that will not be the case. We see so clearly in Zechariah, we see so clearly in Revelation that on that day, it will be a multi-ethnic crowd coming to worship the Lord, coming to serve the Lord, coming in harmony, no longer with aggression, no longer with hostility, no longer with pain, no longer with aggressions or microaggressions. No, we are coming together in peace, fully healed, fully made new, fully loving one another. Survivors from all the nations, even the enemies. There will be a remnant, even from the enemy nations, and the remnant, the faithful remnant, will come together to worship the Lord. And on that day, everything will be made holy. This may seem like a strange way to end the book of Zechariah in verse 20 and 21, because he's talking about things like the bells of the horses and the pots in the basins. And it's a very strange way to end. It can feel anticlimactic. But what God is telling us today is that on that day when the Lord returns, everything will be made holy. From the smallest, most insignificant horse bell to the most common clay basin, everything will be made holy. And as we worship, this last line, we recognize that what God is not doing is excluding the Canaanites. What he is because we just talked about how all the nations will gather to worship him. In the history of Israel, oftentimes there would be pollution, there would be idolatry that would happen when those who weren't called into the temple to worship God came in there. And so on that day, there will be no temptation to idolatry. There'll be no temptation to go astray. We will all be made holy. And the main takeaway, family, from this section is that we will have true rest. You know how comforting it is to have a strong leader? I don't know if you've ever in your life experienced this. Maybe as a child, maybe there's an aunt or an uncle that you just felt safe with. A grandmother you just felt safe with. A mother or father you just felt safe with. And if you were in their presence, you felt like everything's going to be okay. Family, on this day, when we see our King Jesus reigning on the throne, we will have assurance in every fiber of our being. It's gonna be okay because King Jesus reigns. Family, you and I need strength for the journey. You may need strength this morning, but if not this morning, you're gonna need it this week. There's gonna be some moment this week where you're tempted to kind of get off course. You're gonna be tempted to forget. You're gonna be tempted to despair. On this journey, we need strength. And to find strength for the journey, we need to meditate on that day. Because God has promised that on that day, he will protect us. On that day, he will purify us. On that day, he will fight for us. And on that day, he will lead us. And he's doing all of this because of what Jesus Christ did for us on the cross. Let's pray.